Now it's time for perspective. And when talking about ceasefires in Sudan, it is difficult not to sound sceptical. There have been many since fighting there entered into its sixth week now. Hundreds of people have been killed and over 1 million have been forced to leave their homes, either internally or externally. Now the new effort, though, has been agreed at talks in Saudi Arabia, culminated on Saturday. It's due to come into effect tonight at 9:45 Khartoum time. The latest effort after days then of talks. It's due to last 7 days, and it will be enforced by a so-called ceasefire monitoring mechanism, according to a statement released from those talks. Well, joining us now is Andreas Krieg, who's a senior lecturer at the School of Security Studies at King's College in London. Thanks very much for joining us on the programme. As I said there, I mean, it's the next of a series of ceasefires that we've had announced between the regular army and the rapid support forces who are fighting in Sudan. It is difficult to not be a little sceptical, isn't it? Do you hold out any more hope this time around?
Yes, good morning. I'm slightly more optimistic than the previous instances, just for the very simple reason that this time we have a very clear framework in place. We have that oversight committee that consists of the United States, Saudi Arabia, and representatives of both of the warring factions. But yes, the problem here is, and I think why we should be just very carefully optimistic here, is that the fact is this is a ceasefire. This is not not a start to a peace negotiation or a way of trying to find a solution to the conflict. This is merely a ceasefire for humanitarian reasons. And the big problem that we've had in the past is that there is relatively little buy-in into what is negotiated on the strategic level by representatives, for example, in Saudi Arabia, and by what is being conducted in terms of operations on the ground across Sudan. And that's particularly true for the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, which is a militia group which is very heterogeneously and hierarchically organized, which means it's very difficult to actually exercise command and control. So, I'm a bit more optimistic, but also saying that after a week or so, this fighting will very, very likely resume, because we haven't had a real proper solution, or nothing has been done in terms of addressing the root cause of the problem.
So you would say that the reason that the previous ceasefires have broken down then is not necessarily because the overall authorities, if you like, of the two groups are not behind it, but it's impossible for them to control the troops on the ground.
No, I mean, this is a war of attrition in the end of the day. Both sides are fighting each other with gaining very little ground. It's almost like a stalemate, where both sides, one day the RSF might make some gains, the next day this Sudanese armed forces will make some gains. But it's a tit for tat that no side is really winning. So we're in that stalemate, which is not necessarily mutually hurting yet, because both sides still think and believe very, very strongly that they can win this war on the battlefield rather than around the negotiation table. But there is pressure from outside, the US pressure in particular. There's pressure from Saudi Arabia, who was a key broker and a key external ally for both the Sudanese army as well as the RSF. So there is some leverage that's been exercised over both of the parties. But the root cause of these two men not wanting to share power, both of them authoritarians in uniform, means that this fighting will likely continue, because the problem has not been resolved at all.
And of course, that means that the people who are suffering are the people of Sudan. What's the latest you're hearing on how much people are suffering and where they're being affected?
All over the country, obviously, but you can imagine that if war is being waged within Khartoum, within an urban environment, this inevitably is targeting civilians, even if there was ever any effort made to actually stop this, because in reality there is no effort made, what we can see from either side, to really to discriminately target each other. They're targeting civilian areas. We've had shelling from both sides, but obviously the Sudanese armed forces have air force. They have an air force. They've got 8 aircrafts, and they target civilians. But we've had a lot of fighting in Darfur as well, and we have a man with Hemedti and the RSF who has a long track record of war crimes and even allegations of genocide in Darfur, who in the past has not shied away from actually using violence against civilians and committing all kinds of atrocities. So there's very little regard on both sides, I would say, for the lives of civilians. So in the end of the day, the burden of this conflict is being borne not by those fighting, but by those on the sidelines, which are civilians. And the humanitarian crisis is getting worse by the day, and that's why I think this humanitarian corridor or ceasefire that we're looking at the moment is extremely important to allow external support to come into the country amid a at least for a week, amid a ceasefire and both warring factions not killing each other. But in the end of the day, this is a severe humanitarian crisis, and we need the global public attention to make sure that this will come to an end.
How much difference could it actually make? I mean, as you say, the truce is very much about humanitarian help and getting that help in. In reality, a 7-day truce isn't going to make that much difference, is it?
Not really, but it's a building block. It's about building confidence. If we see that this holds for 7 days, we can use this, or the international community, particularly the United States and Saudi Arabia, will use this to bring both of the warring factions together again to build upon this, allow them a little bit of fighting, and maybe present them with potential solutions, which at the moment I don't really see, because at the heart of this problem is, and I think this goes to the United States, that goes to the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and also the UK, and because we've been kind of propping up two authoritarians in uniform who never wanted to share power, who never believed in civilian transition, and both of them obviously having quite extensive networks across the Horn of Africa, but also into the Gulf. The UAE in particular is a very, very interesting case study here, because they've been propping up, providing Hemedti with an infrastructure to get gold to market, providing him with mercenary support, infrastructure support, trade support, logistical support, and thereby creating the belief on both sides of the warring factions in Sudan that they can win this war. And now that leverage is not used very effectively, because obviously the infrastructure is already in place, and both of them are very much propped up. They're empowered. They feel empowered as well to continue fighting. So the key issue here is that these two people are not the solution to the problem of governance in Sudan. So, we need to come up with probably a third party that can bring these two warring factions together and make sure that the military and the RSF are integrated under civilian control. And that is and should still be the overall goal, and the goal that neither the Saudis nor the Emiratis nor the Americans have actually worked towards.
We're running out of time. I just want to ask you if you can sum up in 30 seconds. We've been told a lot that this war is not just about Sudan, that it could affect a much wider region. Why is that?
Sudan is at the absolute crossroads ethnically between, the Arabs and sub-Saharan Africans. It's a crossroads between the Arab world, the Muslim world, but also between Asia and Africa. If you then look at the ethnic ties in Sudan, it's a multi-ethnic country. Ethnicities are, they are transnational. They go across borders. Obviously, there is South Sudan, which is immediately affected. Chad is affected. Ethiopia, Eritrea. Egypt is affected because we have got migrants going into Egypt. And for the Egyptians, Sudan has always been a major national security priority. So all of that together has immediate ripple effects across the region. And then, as I said before, we have all these Gulf countries being involved as well in Sudan, and having done so for quite a long time. So this is a regional conflict with ties to Libya and all across northern and eastern Africa.
Great to get your perspective today. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Andreas Krieg from King's College in London. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.